Meanwhile, Yeon-woo was silently watching this situation with his mouth open. He looked quite surprised. He quickly reached the nearest power outlet and plugged his cell phone into the charger. Yeon-woo couldn't remember the last time he had used his phone. Ever since he had been in the vault, his cell phone had been dormant. Finally, he saw his phone turn on and light up to show that it was charging. Now he could contact his parents and see what was going on in the classroom group chat. The guy looked at the black screen of his smartphone and saw his reflection. For a second, he caught himself thinking that he could live without his phone all day and not feel lonely. Yeon-woo stared at his locked phone screen and thought about what Isuri had done. The girl's behavior was quite unusual for him. The guy started to remember school. He realized that he had never talked to her in class. The girl always sat alone, on the first desk, like any excellent student. Yeon-woo recalled a school project. He was paired with his best friend Kim Joo-bin, and Isuri was in a group with two other girls, and they had to work on a joint project. Even then, the girl was always stone-faced and did not reveal her emotions, except for excess and pride. When her classmates told her that the teacher had put them together to work on a project, Isuri simply said a curse word and added that she was in pain. She was not exactly friendly. Back then, Yeon-woo noticed that his classmates' behavior was not very pleasant. He remembered overhearing a conversation about Isuri being a wild queen. And he wasn't the only one who thought she was unfriendly in the classroom at the time. When he remembered this, he thought to himself that he knew that his classmates were saying all sorts of unpleasant things about Isuri behind her back. Finally, Yeon-woo returned to reality and thought about everything he remembered about his school days. He was quite upset by these memories, but he began to better understand the behavior of his classmate Isuri. Suddenly, Yeon-woo thought that maybe the girl wasn't as bad as he thought she was. Then women came into the room and the guy overheard their conversation, because she caught him from the first phrase. Yeon-woo turned toward the sound. It was a group of 3 women discussing something, probably some gossip about the vault and the people in it. The women discussed what they had heard quite loudly and emotionally. One of them called the lady in the blue t-shirt too naive after what she had told them. The lady in the center with the hat on her head told the woman in the blue t-shirt to repeat what she had just told them. She reiterated that the people who came with her to the shelter said that there was already someone here who was immune to the frog egg virus. At this point, Yeon-woo perked up his ears and listened intently to the women. Then they began to discuss the people they had come to the shelter with. The woman in the blue t-shirt continued that the person who told her the rumor was good at catching monsters and loved to help people. At first, she didn't believe it either and thought it was nonsense. But they, the people who came with them, said that they saw a person who was immune to the frog egg virus. Yeon-woo listened to the conversation very carefully. His heart was beating faster and faster as what he was hearing caused him to panic. The women said that the infected boy was fine, even though he had touched the frog egg virus. The lady in the blue t-shirt went on to say that the infected man took her hand firmly and said something to her. All the other listeners were shocked by the story. But, unfortunately, she didn't have time to finish. Some guy interrupted her at the most interesting part. A young man with dark hair and a frightening smile interrupted and said that if he was in danger, God would tell him. His words sounded rather strange and alarming. Yeon-woo watched what was happening closely. The women began to speak in favor of religion, and someone recommended that they go to church more often. The conversation stopped making sense. Meanwhile, the man continued to charge his phone and waited for it to turn on. The women went back to talking about the man who was immune to the frog egg virus. One of them offered to go to him, as he was a volunteer in the aid department. Yeon-woo could not come to his senses. The phrase immunity kept running through his head. He could not believe what he had just heard. This conversation was making him panic and feel anxious in the background. He had to find out more about this man. Suddenly, Yeon-woo didn't notice anyone approaching him, because his thoughts and mind were elsewhere. It seemed to be the pious man who had recommended that he go to church more often. The teenager was a little scared because of what he heard, because he was flying in his mind. The man called out to him, and Yeon-woo turned toward the sound. It turned out that it was the bus driver who had abandoned the boys' classmates to their fate. If he was here, then Honmi and the other girls who had managed to get on the bus must have been in the shelter. The man turned to Yeon-woo and asked for help. He asked the guy to borrow a charger. He probably wanted to call his daughter Jinyo. The man sounded very friendly, but something in his voice didn't sound right. However, Yeon-woo was in no hurry to give him the charger and asked him again what the man needed. The guy started shaking his head to the side and saying that she was not here. He seemed to be looking for Isuri. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo called his mom. His phone was finally charged. The guy still lent the charger to the bus driver and decided to call everyone at that time so that they would not worry about him. He told his mother that he was still in the shelter. He added that it would take some time before he could get out of Seoul. Yeon-woo said that his parents should return to Chonan if possible, because there was no point in waiting for their son. Moreover, it was dangerous. With that, he said goodbye to his parents. The bus driver overheard his conversation. He asked if he was right to think that Jeon-woo's parents were far away, but the boy did not answer. He silently turned to the man and looked at him with a slightly surprised look that expressed slight dissatisfaction. The bus driver noticed this and said that he overheard him talking and added an apology at the end. It seems that he had manners after all. Yeon-woo was a friendly teenager, so he said it was no big deal. He explained that he was stuck here because of a field trip, and his parents were visiting, so they were worried sick. The man sympathized with the boy and suggested that it must have been difficult for them to get to this place. The bus driver added that Yeon-woo must have been worried about his parents, just as they were worried about their son. The man's voice was completely sad. He looked like he was about to start a sob story about his daughter and how he wanted to play with her. And so it happened. The bus driver said that he also has a daughter, and if he were in the same situation as Yeon-woo's parents, he would have immediately gone to Seoul to save her. It is a pity that he did not want to save other children. Yeon-woo did not understand the sad and more depressing motive in the man's voice, so he just nodded in response. But the bus driver did not stop. He continued to tell poor Yeon-woo about his problems. He said that his daughter had been sick since she was a little girl. Yeon-woo stood there silently, not knowing how to react or what to say. But fortunately or unfortunately, the bus driver was not about to let him speak. He told him that his daughter Jin-yo had been hospitalized, even though she was only 9 years old. The man wanted to hear support from a teenager he didn't know. He seemed to be very lonely. Suddenly, the bus driver came to his senses and realized that he had been playing too much. So he apologized to Yeon-woo and closed the subject. But suddenly, the teenager also opened up to him. He told him that he had also been very sick when he was little. The bus driver's eyes widened at what he heard. Yeon-woo continued to tell me that he waited every day for his mother to return from work in the hospital room. His gaze was downward. It looked like he was sad to remember this. Suddenly, he turned to the man and looked directly into his eyes. Yeon-woo supported the driver and said that his daughter would definitely get better. The man laughed merrily after saying that, and said that the guy not only lent him the charger, but also encouraged him and gave him hope. Suddenly, the bus driver changed the subject to the excursion Yeon-woo was talking about. The man said he had heard about it from children who had fled Namsan. He asked again if Yeon-woo had come to Seoul. Suddenly, the boy's heart beat fast. He heard familiar words. It could not be a coincidence. The children the bus driver was talking about were his classmates. But the man did not continue this topic. His attention turned to the call from his phone. The driver's face changed dramatically. A wide smile appeared on his face, and his eyes widened with joy. He told Yeon-woo that it was his daughter who called him. The bus driver thanked the boy and said that he would return the favor. But he didn't specify what kind of kindness. The man abruptly stood up and walked away, happily talking on the phone with his Jin-yo, leaving Yeon-woo alone with his thoughts. The boy looked at the man and was in a stupor. Later, he had to find him and ask him about these children who were going on a field trip to Namsan. Yeon-woo headed into the crowd to find his classmates, including Isuri, to return her charger. The boy's mind was still filled with thoughts of the man who was immune. Yeon-woo thought that he might have been able to get a better idea of the pain in his arm if he had met the man. He remembered that he had to look for the emergency room. Suddenly, when the teenager looked up, he saw his classmate Isuri sitting on her phone. Yeon-woo went to her. The guy thanked her for the charger a little uncertainly and stammering and handed it to her. The girl didn't even turn to him. Suddenly, Isuri ignored Yeon-woo's words and asked him if he had seen anything. The boy's face was frightened because he expected aggression from his classmate, as he had after their last conversation. Instead, the girl turned to him and said that someone had sent him a message in their class group chat. She showed it to Yeon-woo. It was written by Kang Ji-hoon, the headman. He wrote that their company, which consisted of So-yeon, Kang Min, and a soldier, was near Namsan and hiding from a monster that was chasing them. He asked if anyone could help them. Yeon-woo read it and could not believe his eyes. His heart was beating wildly at the thought that So-yeon was alive. Although he was very angry with her, his feelings were stronger than anger. The boy's eyes widened greatly. He was overwhelmed with hope to see his beloved again, because she was next to Namsan. It was close enough. The story switched to the company that the bus driver had betrayed and left on the road. Kang Ji-hoon shouted out happily that he finally had a connection and could contact his classmates. Kang Min was also excited about this and started to pull out his phone to contact the others. But in any case, They had no idea what to do next. The company was hiding at a gas station. Behind the glass was a huge zombie monster that looked like a giant spider. It turned out that it was Gimson the cat. He was stalking the company and sensing his victims. They were looking through the glass at what was happening outside. The company had no idea what to do next or how to escape. The events shifted back a few hours, when they were running away from the cats that attacked them after the bus driver betrayed the company and drove away. They ran away as fast as they could. Fortunately, the zombie cats did not have time to infect anyone. The first thing they saw on their way to take cover was a mini-market. So without hesitation, the company decided to hide in it. The headman, Kang Jae-hoon, ran up first and started opening the door to go inside, while the soldier made sure that no monster followed him. Seo-young and Kang Min just looked away, but unfortunately the door was locked. It looked like no one was inside, so the company had to quickly find another shelter before the zombie monsters caught up with them. Although Kang Jae-hoon wanted to break down the door. Meanwhile, Kang Min spotted a gas station nearby where they could hide. It was very close, so the company had time. The boy told his classmate Kang Ji-hoon that if he broke the door, they would not be able to hide in the mini-market from the monsters. He suggested that they should hide in a gas station instead. The company had already started to leave, but Kang Ji-hoon offered to break down the door anyway and just take the food. But they talked him out of it. They left, and didn't notice that someone was still inside the mini-market. Suddenly, the starosta turned around and noticed something strange that caught his attention. He carefully examined the floor of the convenience store. Something on it seemed rather strange to him. Some food was scattered on the floor. So, someone was inside and most likely covered themselves with chairs to prevent the monsters from getting inside. But Kang Jae-hoon ran after the others and didn't bother to find out what was in that strange mini-market. Kang Min ran first and said that they needed to get to the building as soon as possible. The events moved forward a few hours again, where Kang Min and Kang Ji-hoon were looking out for zombie monsters outside. They saw a cat that looked more like a giant spider. Luckily, the zombie monster didn't notice them and just walked around. The company also recognized the monster as Gimson the cat, who was the favorite of their rescuer, their grandmother. The soldier started telling me terrible things. He said that when they were running away, the man clearly saw that one of the cats that had been set on fire had survived. It seemed to be him. The cat was at the end of the gang, so the fire did not reach him. He looked so powerful and invincible then. It inspired fear in the military. Suddenly, something worse happened. The cat reached the corpses of other cats and stopped. The man felt that something very strange was about to happen. What he saw made his blood run cold. The cat started to release its white tentacles and merged with the corpses of other cats, turning into one big zombie monster. Everyone was scared when they heard this information. After all, when a cat merges with other corpses, it is not so scary. But a human monster could do it, and it would be much more dangerous. The cat seemed to sense that they were talking about him and looked at the gas station door and growled. The military man saw this and said that the zombie monsters were stronger than they had imagined and thought. Suddenly, the zombie cat opened its big, ugly jaw and growled. It seemed to notice the company behind the glass. Luckily, it was over. The cat turned away from the glass door and walked on. Kang Ji-hoon asked what it was and why the zombie monster was looking back like that. Suddenly, the soldier's expression changed dramatically. He began to understand the behavior of the zombie cat. The man came up with the hypothesis that the cat was trying to find them in this way. The zombie monster was indeed constantly looking around, as if searching for victims. He felt that they were somewhere nearby, because he was no longer chasing anyone. The military man said that if the cat followed them to the gas station and stopped, it meant that this zombie monster had a pretty strong sense of smell. Apparently, the zombie had skills from the victim it inhabited. But fortunately, the room was completely saturated with gasoline and various oils that had a pungent odor. So the soldier offered to wait inside until the zombie monster left them alone. Kang Ji-hoon and the soldier sat in the corners. Kang Min looked out the window and kept an eye on the situation. The starosta was obsessively trying to do something on his phone. It turned out that he was calling Hanma. The guy was very worried about what happened to her after that vile bus driver hit her in the face. But instead of the familiar voice of his classmate, Kang Ji-hoon heard an answering machine saying that the phone number he was calling was temporarily out of service. Kang Ji-hoon was unable to contain his emotions and swore out loud. The boy told his friend Kang Min that she did not pick up the phone. His classmate asked him who he was talking about. Kang Ji-hoon was very upset and scared. He had no choice but to write to the class chat to ask if someone could contact Hong Mi or call Hannah and Minju, as they were also on the bus. Suddenly, the guy could not stand it and screamed loudly in a mat, holding his head with his hands. His shouting attracted Kang Min's attention. Even a friend would not have expected such behavior from the elder Kang Ji-hoon. He swore that he would kill the damn bus driver if he caught him. The guy wanted revenge for Han-mi. It seems that he really cared about the girl. Kang Ming looked at his friend who was shouting at the top of his voice how angry he was and thought of something to say to support him. The boy recalled that Kang Ji-hoon himself had told him that even if the bus left, everything would still be fine. He ironically added that he was angry now, and it turns out that he didn't believe his own words. Kang Min had a smile on his face. But Kang Ji-hoon looked down at his friend and said in an angry voice that he was angry for the wrong reason. His gaze was very confident, but Kang Min didn't believe him and laughed right in his face. He said that when the bus left, Kang Ji-hoon's mind was blown. It seems that his friend was hinting that someone was very much in love. Suddenly, Headmaster Kang Ji-hoon stood up abruptly and walked toward the door, shouting angrily from behind him for his friend Kang Min to leave him alone. But his classmate ignored his fake anger and added that Kang Ji-hoon's behavior only proved Kang Min's truthfulness. The headman opened the door and left the room where they were all sitting. Kang Min asked him where he was going. Did he really want to escape the conversation so badly? Kang Ji-hoon told him to go to hell and said that he wanted to look for some food because he was very hungry. The guy walked into the other room slowly, looking around. The chairs were upside down and the table was a mess. Kang Ji-hoon reached out to open one of the top drawers. He hoped that there would be some food in there, but instead, he just swore loudly that there was no food in it again. It seemed that this was not the first drawer. Had the people who worked here left no crumbs behind? Kang Ji-hoon thought for a second. A situation was running through his mind. He couldn't control his emotions and keep from thinking about it. The guy remembered the moment when a lousy, disgusting bus driver beat his beautiful and innocent Han-mi. How she screamed and cried in pain. That raghead was hitting the teenager with all his might. Kang Ji-hoon's eyes were filled with anger. He couldn't contain his emotions. He wanted revenge right here and now. He had to get to the vault to find that bastard and pay him back. The guy remembered his girlfriend's crying face and busted lip again, and with the anger that had been building up inside him all this time, he slammed the closet door. Suddenly, he heard the voice of a soldier from behind him, so he turned to the sound. The man was telling Kang Ji-hoon to break down all the doors. He was obviously saying it with irony. After that, he added instructively that if the guy was angry, he should go to the corner and get angry there. The soldier continued and asked if Kang Ji-hoon had forgotten about the monster that was looking for them outside. Surprisingly, the starosta didn't say anything, although he could have and wanted to start a fight. Perhaps then he would have released all his aggression, but the boy remained silent. Kang Ji-hoon simply turned around and wanted to leave the room, as he realized that the soldier was not going to leave. Suddenly, he was stopped by a man's question. He asked if all this behavior and aggression was because of that girl. Although the soldier did not mention her name, they both understood who he was talking about. Kang Ji-hoon turned sharply to the man and looked at him with an angry look in his eyes. The soldier was invading his privacy, even though Kang Ji-hoon didn't look like a person who liked to share anything personal. But the man wasn't afraid of him, so he asked if they had been close before, including in middle school. He remembered Han-mi telling him this. Kang Ji-hoon guessed that such precise facts could not be a hypothesis through observation. So he asked the soldier if it was Hong-mi who told him that they had been close, but the man was silent. He stood with his back to the boy and said nothing. So Kang Ji-hoon wanted to justify himself somehow and said that everyone was close to her, hinting that she was just that kind of person and had good communication with everyone. The guy continued to justify himself, but was unable to finish. The soldier interrupted him because he did not want to listen to this deception. He asked directly if the two of them had met before. This question caused Kang Ji-hoon's face to change dramatically, and without his answer, it was clear that the soldier had hit the nail on the head with his question. The man casually opened the door of a cabinet and wanted to take something out, making a rather long pause in their conversation, making it clear that Kang Ji-hoon would have to answer his questions. But the guy was silent, so the soldier bluffed and said that Han-mi had told him when they were making Molotov cocktails together. The man suddenly imagined these memories. He just asked if they were close. The girl was very nervous and answered yes, but then added that she had dated Kang Ji-hoon until middle school. The guy turned pale from this information, and drops of sweat ran down his face. It was obvious that he was embarrassed that the military man knew about it. Kang Ji-hoon replied that it didn't mean anything and it wasn't his business anyway. The guy was acting quite stupid, but that was because he had nothing to say. He was cornered, but the soldier's response surprised him. He said that he only wanted to help him. At this phrase, Kang Ji-hoon's pupils dilated and his eyebrows rose to his forehead. The man turned to look at his friend and added that he would help him find his so-called girlfriend or girlfriend. Meanwhile, So-yeon sat in the room and watched through the glass what was happening outside. Suddenly, someone handed her a hot drink in a paper cup from a vending machine. He offered So-yeon a drink. That someone was Kang-min. He scared the girl a little. She still couldn't get used to what had been happening to her all these days. The guy said that there was instant coffee. This gesture of kindness made the girl happy. She hadn't eaten for a long time and a hot drink was perfect at that moment. A smile appeared on her face. Kang-min wanted to talk to his classmate. He asked her what she saw through the glass and then added whether she was afraid of the cats. The question was quite strange, but So-yeon realized that the boy was just looking for an excuse to talk. But the girl's mood was quite pessimistic. She was looking down. Her gaze was very sad, as if something had been weighing her down all this time. Some obsessive thought. She started talking about something she wanted to do. It was clear from her voice that So-yeon was up to no good. She said that she was a burden to her friends, especially since she was wounded. But the guy didn't let her finish and interrupted her. He said it was enough that they were already together. Kang-min asked if her thought was because of Kang Ji-hoon. He told So-yeon not to listen to the headman. The girl was silent. It was obvious that her classmate's words did not encourage her much, and she kept thinking about her stupid idea. Kang-min noticed this mood and had to quickly think of something else to cheer up. He said that anytime she was in a fight, she had a hammer with her. But So-yeon didn't understand what Kang-min was talking about. So he smiled and reminded her of the hammer he had given her on the bus. This brought a smile to the girl's face. It seems that Kang-min managed to cheer the girl up and improve her mood. The girl abruptly opened her purse and quickly started looking for something in it. And then she took out a small red hammer and showed it to Kang-min. So-yeon's expression became kinder and gentler. He was like that in school. She laughed and said that fighting with that hammer was like committing suicide. Kang-min was also amused by this phrase and said that So-yeon was holding it wrong. Meanwhile, Kang Ji-hoon came up to them and silently watched what was happening. He interrupted the fun of his classmates and said that he thought Kang-min was watching over their safety from the outside, but it turned out that he was talking nonsense. So-yeon's face changed dramatically, and it was clear that she didn't like the headmaster. Kang-min sensed this and realized that he had to support his friend because she was already suffering from what Kang Ji-hoon had said to her earlier. He whispered to So-yeon to remember that if she listened to the headman, she would become a failure like him. Ji-hoon heard this and was outraged, but Kang-min abruptly changed the subject and said that he recalled that Kang Ji-hoon had written to the group's chat room and asked if anyone had replied to his message. But by the look on Kang Ji-hoon's face, he realized that something was wrong with the group. There was an air of anger about him. Park Min answered the boy and called him a freak. He was indignant that the chief had left Yeon-woo alone on the cable car. He called Ji-hoon an asshole and said that the boy shouldn't have done that. Park Min also added that Kim Ju-bin had sacrificed himself and died to save Yeon-woo. Kang Ji-hoon shouted to the others and told them to read the message from Park Min. So-yeon and Kang-min quickly pulled out their phones and opened a group chat. So-yeon's face changed dramatically. Her heart beat faster. She was overjoyed to hear the news because it meant that Yeon-woo had survived and she didn't have to blame herself so much for running away. Ham Song-yu added that he and Yeon-woo were in hiding. He asked if their company was now in Namsan and asked if it was revenge. Headmaster Kang Ji-hoon asked out loud if Ham Seong-yu wanted to die. He was very angry and did not understand what the two classmates were talking about, although So-yeon had repeatedly reminded him that they had indeed betrayed Yeon-woo and left him for dead. The boy almost miraculously survived. Suddenly, they heard a sound from outside. All three of them looked up to see what had happened. They heard someone screaming. The scream seemed to be coming from a convenience store. Kang-min was the first to ask what was going on. Kang Ji-hoon mentioned that he heard strange sounds of a box falling as they tried to get inside. The teenagers saw people running out of the mini-market. There were a lot of them. They were running and screaming as if someone was inside. Maybe it was a zombie monster. So-yeon was very scared because she didn't want to run away from anyone again. And these people could run to them and bring a monster with them. Suddenly, a large zombie monster ran out of the convenience store, breaking the glass. It seems that one of those people was infected and became a monster. The teenagers saw people running straight to their gas station. Kang Ji-hoon was unhappy that the crowd was running straight to them. A guy was the first to arrive at the gas station door. He began to break down the door and apologize. So they hadn't opened the company's door on purpose, and now they wanted to take shelter of them themselves. The man was screaming like crazy and apologizing. He swore that they were going to open the door for them, but the company had already left. He begged them to let the teenagers open the door for them, but their classmates were not going to open the door to them right away. Kang Ji-hoon told them not to, because the monsters were coming from the mini-market, so some of them could be infected. On the other hand, if a zombie monster caught them now, the teenagers would have several times more enemies. The man who was running last realized they weren't going to open the door, so he took a chair that was standing at the entrance. He shouted that the teenagers had decided they were the owners of the store. He did not like the behavior of the company, because he had behaved like this a few hours earlier towards these teenagers. The man swung a blue chair and was about to break down the door. He was being very selfish. After all, breaking the door would not have saved them from the zombie monsters. But then everyone would be in danger. Suddenly, a soldier ran to the teenagers. He ordered everyone to run away from the window quickly because the glass could hurt them. But the man still did not understand what was happening. When he ran closer, he saw this horrible picture. His eyes were filled with incomprehension. He did not know who those people were and why they wanted to break down the door. Suddenly, the soldier saw something that scared him. A zombie cat stood behind the gang, intent on kicking in the door. The man with the blue chair didn't notice the monster and continued to threaten to kick in the door if they didn't open it. Suddenly, he heard growling sounds behind him. This made him abandon the idea of breaking the glass. The robber turned to see who was growling. He already knew in his head that he was in danger. Like this, the zombie monster opened its huge mouth. It was about to attack the man and their entire company. It seems that they had never encountered monsters before, because the zombie cat immediately attacked him and let loose its white tentacles, knocking the robber to the ground. The events moved to the room where Kang Ji-hoon and the soldier were talking about Hanmi. After the man offered to help the boy find his girlfriend, he said that in return, Kang Ji-hoon had to promise him something. He didn't look at the guy. He looked at what was happening outside. He said that the boy had to promise that from now on he would not lose his temper so easily and would keep himself in check better. He also added that the headman, Kang Ji-hoon, should think about who could be a threat to his friends. The man spoke calmly and confidently. It was like talking to a father who was giving valuable advice. The boy did not answer. His hormones and adolescent maximalism did not allow him to react calmly and simply accept the words of a man who apparently wished him well. So Kang Ji-hoon just left. Although he promised himself to think about what the soldier said, he wanted to find his beloved Hanmi. He still had strong feelings for her. The man realized that the boy had left. He felt different emotions now, but sadness prevailed the most. The soldier saw in Kang Ji-hoon himself and his beloved, whom he had unfortunately lost. The man looked at his ring. His heart was squeezing inside. He was in so much pain. Suddenly, he heard the voice of his beloved Ji-sun. She said that this behavior was unusual for her, because he had never worried about anyone before. The man said out loud that if his beloved Ji-sun was here now, she was probably laughing at him for being a soldier in such a situation with teenagers. Suddenly, the man regained consciousness and heard someone yelling from the street to open the door. The voice was threatening and very angry. The soldier turned toward the sound and realized he had to run to help. The events again shifted to the moment when the robbers were attacked by a zombie cat and the teenagers began to run away from the door. The soldier shouted that his classmates were running to him. He quickly realized what was happening. The teenagers ran after him. The man seemed to know where the other exit was. They had to leave the room, because now there were at least 5 monsters around them who knew they existed. When the children ran into the room where the man was, the soldier was carefully examining what had happened outside and assessing the criticality of the situation. The girl hid behind a man in a striped sweatshirt. They watched their friend being eaten by a zombie cat. The woman asked what they should have done. Suddenly, they heard a soldier speaking to them. He was shouting for the 2 of them to run to him. The man could not leave them to die and shouted for them to run to him as quickly as possible, as it was very dangerous outside. But the couple stood in a stupor and did not move. The soldier was waiting for them and kept calling them over. Suddenly, Kang Ji-hoon stopped the man and said that if he let the 2 in, they would all be in danger. But the soldier told him that they would have been dead too, if not for that old lady from the restaurant. He shouted at the guy that they shouldn't have helped these people then. Goodness must be repaid. Kang Ji-hoon looked at him with a serious look. His face showed an understanding of how selfish he had been, but the couple continued to stand there. The woman put her hand over her mouth in amazement. She could not believe what was happening, but the man seemed to be slowly moving toward the entrance. He had to save himself. Finally, he yelled to his friend Miju to run after him. Then the pair began to run, but a zombie cat noticed this. He didn't want to kill his victims. Suddenly, the monster opened its mouth again and screamed at the steam. It released its tentacles on the fugitives. The woman covered her face with her hands to avoid seeing what was happening. They were not as fast as teenagers. Kang Ji-hoon noticed a fan on his wall. Without hesitation, the guy grabbed it and threw it at the zombie monster. Thus, he saved the couple from certain death. The soldier was shocked by this act of his new friend. Kang Ji-hoon was silently shaking his head. The guy was really a good shot, because he hit the target and saved the couple. He noticed that the man was staring at him, so he asked what the problem was. And then he said that the soldier himself said that they were supposed to help these people, but they didn't have time to finish the conversation because the couple had already run into the room, lying on the floor. The soldier peered through the crack in the door to see what had happened to the zombie monster. Perhaps it had died, and then they could all stay in the room. The man saw that the fan was stuck in the cat. It was not spinning because its paws were stuck in the frog egg virus and mucous membranes. The cat showed no signs of life. Suddenly, the zombie monster raised its head and perked its ears. The cat growled as if to let them know that they would not get rid of him so easily. Then, the soldier slammed the door shut and held it tight. He realized that the zombie monster knew about them and would soon get there. They had to quickly come up with an escape plan. For now, the soldier simply locked the door. The whole company looked at the newcomers in shock. The man, meanwhile, was laughing loudly and collecting his thoughts, replaying what had just happened. Suddenly, he started crying and thanked his rescuers a lot. He was ashamed of them for not helping them when the company wanted to get into the mini-market. But suddenly, the man's tearful speech was interrupted. Everyone turned to the door because they heard some sounds from the other side. Someone tried to open the handle. It seems that the zombie monster got to them faster than they could have imagined. The soldier reacted quickly, so he propped the door up with himself, holding it securely. The man loudly commanded them all to bring something heavy to him quickly. Then the soldier would be able to block the door. After all, if he let them go, the zombie monster would most likely get inside. But the teenagers were a little stuck, because they could not get over the previous incident. Then the soldier once again told them to think faster. Still, the man was very professional, and this helped him to react quickly in such extreme situations. Thanks to him, the company was still alive. The teenagers quickly came to their senses and ran to find something heavy to prop up the door with. Kang Ji-hoon immediately grabbed the refrigerator and shouted to Kang Min to help him. But he said that he had his hands full because he had grabbed the water boiler. These were probably the heaviest objects in the room. Everyone wanted to escape so badly and not let the soldier down. A few minutes later, there was already a pile of heavy objects under the door, and loud gasps were heard. Everyone present did a good job. They propped up the door with a refrigerator, a heater, a water boiler, a freezer, and many other items. The monster could definitely not come in now. For a few seconds, everyone stood silently and looked at the door to see and hear if the monster could enter. Suddenly, instead of a zombie monster, they heard a woman crying. She covered her face with her hands. A man named Seongchul Oppa immediately approached her. He tried to calm his friend Misha down. He hugged her and said that he would protect her no matter what. But the girl still cried a lot. She could not bear the loss of her friend. It seems they were quite close. Like here, the soldier asked if they were okay. It was impossible not to notice the girl's despair. The man expressed his condolences and said he was very sorry for what had happened to their friend. Seongchul just nodded. He was also grieving, but he kept all his emotions inside. Here, the soldier asked whether the couple was also going to the shelter, and with this phrase seemed to invite them with him. But, surprisingly, the couple knew about the shelter, and the man said that they were also going there, but wanted to rest a bit before reaching the shelter. He also added that all the local people were in that shelter. Suddenly, Kang Min spoke up. He said that the distance from the gas station to Seoul station was less than 1 kilometer. It was close enough, so most likely everyone had evacuated long ago. At the same time, the guy was looking for something on the table. Kang Ji-hoon noticed this and asked what his friend was doing. Kang Min replied that he was looking for something useful and continued to look for something. The headman asked another question, whether it was really that important in this situation. Kang Min didn't even turn to his friend and just did his own thing. He thought that Kang Ji-hoon just wanted to hit on someone. Suddenly, Kang Min made a triumphant sound. It seems that the guy had found something after all. He opened a drawer in his desk, which contained various office supplies, scissors, glue, a stapler, tape, and a book. Kang Min shouted happily that he had found something. His voice sounded triumphant, as if he had won the lottery. This time it had to be something better than a small hammer. Suddenly the guy picked up the key and jingled it merrily. Kang Min shouted for everyone to look at him and showed him what he had found. The boy seemed to think it was a car key. Kang Ji-hoon picked up on his friend's joy and gave him a thumbs up and told him he was doing well. Kang Min said they were now able to get to the shelter more or less safely. He asked if it wasn't wonderful. After all, no one was as happy as he was. Suddenly, he heard something strange. A sound, so he looked down to see what it was. Suddenly, all his joy disappeared as frog eggs began to crawl out from below, spreading the virus. They were right next to Kang Min's leg. Suddenly, everyone jumped up quickly and screamed. Kang Min jumped away from them because it seemed that the eggs could sense the boy's presence, so the virus released its white tentacles at Kang Min. A zombie monster began to crawl out from under the rubble. It simply turned into a liquid and somehow got through all the objects and into the room. The first to react, as always, was a military man. The man shouted for everyone to disperse, took a chair and swung it to break the window and escape from the room and the monster. Everyone started to climb out through the hole one by one. Kang Min and So-yeon went first, followed by the soldier, and the last were a couple of newcomers. Meanwhile, the monster was getting deeper and deeper, leaving its slime all over everything. Kang Ji-hoon was the first to get down to the ground. The height was not high, but it could have been an obstacle for Seo-young because of her leg. But everyone managed to jump out of the window. The first guys ran the fastest to find the car and open it. Kang Min reacted quickly and looked at the keys he was carrying. He looked closely and shouted happily that it was a Honda, because this sign was painted on the keys. This would have helped them greatly in their search and narrowed down the range of options. But unfortunately, all the cars in the parking lot were Honda. The soldier said so and added that they should keep running, because at this rate, they would not find the car they needed. Suddenly, as the soldier was running, he noticed something that made him stop for a second. He turned his attention to a large Honda car. The man thought it was this car, so he ran to it and asked Kang Min for the keys. It turned out that the keys did fit the car. The man got behind the wheel, although he did not say he knew how to drive, and started the car. The soldier shouted to the others to run to the car and get in. With it, they could get to the shelter quickly and relatively safely. 3 people were left, So-yeon and the newcomers Miju and Seongchul Oppa. Suddenly he noticed something. What he saw was not good. A zombie monster was flying behind the runners. Miju's wife was the last to run and complained that it was too far and she couldn't keep up. The military man immediately shouted to warn them that a zombie monster was running behind them. He shouted as loudly as he could because he was sincerely worried about his friends. Everyone turned around to see what the danger was. Kang Min had almost climbed into the car in the meantime. Suddenly, a zombie monster attacked someone. Unfortunately, Miju didn't have time to escape and was captured by the ugly giant's tentacles. Seo-young and Seongchul Oppa put their hands over their ears in fear. The woman screamed and begged for help. Oppa turned to the girl's scream. She was calling his name. Miju was screaming for him to help her. She didn't realize that she was actually dead and had to give her friend a chance to escape. For a second, Seongchul Oppa stopped and looked at his friend and what the zombie monster was doing to her. But the man ran on. He was crying because he had just lost his second loved one in an hour, but he realized that he had to save himself. His heart was clenching from helplessness. Meanwhile, the teenagers all managed to get into the car. Suddenly, they were startled by the man's scream. They all turned to him. Seongchul Oppa shouted out the window and told the soldier to start the car quickly. There was little time, because if the zombie monster had time to pounce on the car, they would not have survived and would have been trapped. Oppa got into the car, pushing the teenagers into the car, because there was not enough space for so many people. Everyone did not understand the man's emotions and just stared at him in a stupor. Suddenly, Seongchul Oppa shouted loudly again for the soldier to start the car faster. His eyes looked so frightened that they seemed crazy. It was very frightening. The soldier immediately stepped on the gas and drove off. Suddenly, they saw a sign that said, Seoul Station. The people in the car shouted with joy. It was such a great victory for all of them, because it seemed like they were about to be safe. Seongchul Oppa shouted joyfully that they had been rescued. Everyone was looking at the road with wide eyes, expecting something extraordinary to happen. Suddenly, their happiness did not last long. After all, Kang Min's phone received a notification that clearly did not announce good news. It was a notification that this Seoul station was now a level 3 danger zone. The teenagers immediately raised their heads to see what was so dangerous in the area. They could not believe their eyes. The whole city was like a spider's web covered with this frog egg virus. It was simply unrealistic to survive here. The teenagers could not believe their eyes. They all had their mouths open and sweat was streaming down their faces from fear. Meanwhile, the events moved back to the shelter. A bunch of people were standing in line outside the blue tent. Jong-woo stood at the very end of the line and looked at someone. It looked like he had found the guy who had survived the zombie monster. He was a young man with bright red hair who was immune to the virus. Jong-woo had to go up to him and ask him everything. The guy was staring at his hero too much. This aroused suspicion. Because of this, The mysterious immune guy noticed Jong-woo's stare and looked back at him. Suddenly, the guy's arm started to hurt badly and sharply. Then he looked at the guy and seemed to feel that this pain was because of him. The red-haired guy's face looked rather strange, as if he realized that he was provoking Jong-woo's pain. Meanwhile, Seoul Station was completely covered in slime and white frog egg virus. Suddenly, one of the monsters stood up and growled loudly. Suddenly, I heard a loud sound of the wheels breaking on the asphalt, followed by a loud and dull thud. The car in which the company was traveling began to lurch from side to side. It was skidding because it had hit a zombie monster. The people inside were not wearing seatbelts and were thrown around the cabin with the car. The soldier shouted at them to hold on better, but fortunately, the man was able to steer the car and simply hit a zombie monster that wanted to attack the company. The soldier looked in the rear view and saw the zombie monster lying unconscious. Perhaps he had knocked it to death, which meant that they could be defeated by force after all. But the adventures did not end there, and Sonchul Oppa shouted to Mr. that there was another obstacle in front of them. The driver braked hard, so all the passengers leaned forward. In front of them was a pile of cars covered with white slime and the frog egg virus. Suddenly, another monster stood in front of them. It was bigger than the one the soldier had just shot down. The man realized that they were trapped and did not know how to get out of it. He had to act quickly and most likely turn around or get out of the car, but the soldier decided to act differently. He stepped on the gas and turned the car around. All the passengers in the car were hit in the side. The man continued to turn. His plan worked, and he simply shot down a zombie monster that most likely intended to attack them. The monster rode on the ground and ended up in the back of the car. It got hit a lot, but the car survived and didn't get any viruses. They didn't have time to stick to it. The soldier turned the car around again, but in the other direction. The passengers inside were already thrown to the other side. Kang Ji-hoon lost his footing and hit his head on the front of the car. He may have been injured or wounded. The soldier turned the car around and drove onto the oncoming lane. He was about to crash into the yellow car, but managed to dodge it. It seems that the man still had a license and knew how to drive a car, and very well. But still, the rearview mirror is a military one. But the owner will not be angry, because most likely he was not alive anymore. Sonchul Oppa told the man that he was going the wrong way. He replied that there was no other way. He had to do what he did. The soldier asked Kang Min, who was in charge of the map, how far they were from the shelter. The guy replied that they were almost there. They had to keep going straight, and then they would reach the shelter. Suddenly, Kang Ming saw something in the window that made him ask to slow down. He pointed somewhere through the window, and all the passengers looked at what Kang Min was pointing at. He pointed to a blue bus with people on it. The soldier stopped abruptly and everyone was thrown forward. They all looked closely at the bus with people to see if it was also stuck because of the monsters. The company saw that the people on the bus were still alive and showing signs begging for help. Kang Min said that these people were alive and added that he would feel guilty if he pretended not to see them. Kang Ji-hoon told him to shut up. Suddenly, Sonchul Oppa yelled at the soldier. He asked what was happening to him. The man looked at him to see what was wrong. He yelled at the man and asked why he started stopping. The whine was that Sonchul was very much afraid of everything and didn't want to take any risks. The man was shouting at the soldier very loudly. His face looked so crazy. He said that the soldier had gone completely crazy because the shelter was right in front of them. He added that they were just supposed to get to a safe place. The soldier looked at Sonchul Oppa with a strong lack of understanding. It seemed that their values did not match. But according to this logic, the company should not have rescued this man and his friends. Suddenly, the voice of his fiancée sounded in the soldier's head. In her memory, she begged him to go to a safe place. He recalled how his beautiful bride screamed at him on the cable car to go without her because she was being consumed by a monster. These memories were very painful for the man. The last thing he remembered about her was her look, eyes that were about to fill with tears because the bride realized that this was their farewell and she was leaving her beloved alone to grieve. This was not how they had imagined their married life. Suddenly, the soldier opened the door and just ran away. Kang Ji-hoon shouted after him and asked where he ran to. The man did not even close the door behind him and did not say a word. He just realized that he had to save these people. The soldier ran to the back of the car. There was a rope and some devices there. He stood back and looked at the instruments and quickly figured out what to do next. He had to act very quickly because the people on the bus were probably hiding from the monsters. Kang Ji-hoon shouted at the soldier. He thought that the soldier was acting absolutely stupidly and putting them all in danger. The headman shouted at him, but it was useless. The man was going to finish his job to the end. Kang Min also shouted that he didn't mean they had to rescue those people on the bus when he said he couldn't pretend he didn't see them. As if on cue, So-yeon came up with the idea that maybe the soldier was going to set the fire. Kang Ji-hoon looked at her. His look said that he had just realized everything, as if he had solved some difficult problem. So-yeon realized this and added that there was fuel in the truck the company was traveling in. It all made sense. Meanwhile, the man continued to search for something in the back of the car, not listening to anyone. Kang Ji-hoon couldn't just let it go. He had to come up with something and solve it immediately. He had a plan of action. Suddenly, Sonchul Oppa started shouting at the teenagers and pushing them around. He was pushing them and shouting for them to leave. The man was going to go instead of the soldier. Did he really want to leave him alone like that, even though he had recently saved his life? But Kang Ji-hoon did not pay attention to this, and simply asked in response if Sonchul Oppa had anything that could have started the fire. But the man simply remained silent, stunned by the teenager's question. Then Kang Ji-hoon asked him again, this time louder, about whether he had a lighter. Song-chul said that he did, and the boy shouted at him to get it as soon as possible. Before the man could get it, Kang Ji-hoon snatched it out of his hands. The guy was going to get out of the car and go to the military, but at the last moment he turned to the man, gave him a threatening look, and told him not to even think about driving. Then, Kang Ji-hoon got out of the car and shouted to his classmates to keep an eye on the man, because he did not trust him. The soldier did not even look at the boy, but the teenager asked what the soldier was doing and why he was not sitting in the car. He received silence, so he continued to say that the man had promised him to find and save Honmi. The soldier did not expect such an answer and such behavior from a guy who had recently lost control of his emotions. Kang Ji-hoon went on to say how he wanted to find Honmi if he stayed here. The soldier began to think about the teenager's words. The elder continued that the man probably thought they were some kind of heroes, but in reality they were not. First of all, they had to take care of themselves. Unfortunately, they could not save everyone. But the soldier's response surprised him greatly and made him go into a stupor. The man apologized to him. He raised his head, looked Kang Ji-hoon in the eye, and said that he did not expect them to understand him. With his words, he seemed to make it clear that the company could go on without him. The soldier just walked away from the guy. He took the hose and ran to the bus with people. He shouted to them that he would help people get out of the bus and save them all. People looked at him as a savior. He was their last hope. The man shouted that he would pave the way with fire, and people just had to wait a little bit. One of the women on that bus looked at him rather surprised. Suddenly, she screamed loudly, closed her eyes and put her hands over her ears. Was it the soldier's words that affected her so much? Suddenly, the woman told the soldier to turn around because there was someone behind him. The man was already scared, with drops of sweat running down his face. But he still turned around, and what he saw made his eyes pop out of his head. The soldier expected a lot, but definitely not this. On top of him was a big pile of zombie monsters that had already spotted him. To deal with them, it was necessary to burn the entire bridge, and possibly more. One of the zombie monsters growled, making itself known. One sharp movement and he would be down, and there was nowhere to run. Meanwhile, the teenagers So-yeon and Kang Min, who remained in the car, tried their best to stop Song-chul Op from driving. They shouted at him, but the man was not going to stop. He was acting very selfishly. So-yeon decided to see how Kang Ji-hoon and the soldier were doing, but this picture did not make her happy. She loosened her grip a little. The girl shouted to Kang Min to look at the monsters that were already attacking the soldier. He had nothing to defend himself with, because Kang Ji-hoon had the lighter. The teenagers were distracted and didn't hold Sonchul Oppa as tightly. So-yeon said they were supposed to help a soldier. The man saw what was happening and panicked. His heart was racing and he did not want to risk his life for anyone. So he took advantage of the moment when the teenagers let go of him and simply kicked his two friends out. He did it with all his strength, absolutely ruthlessly, and shouted at them to get out. Meanwhile, the zombie monster was about to attack the soldier. The man stared at him in a stupor. Because there was nowhere to run, he could only fight and quickly come up with a plan of escape. Suddenly, some yellow liquid poured onto the zombie monster, preventing it from attacking first. It turned out that the man was pouring gasoline on the nasty giant to save himself. The man acted quickly and decisively, and did not seem to panic at all. It was clear that the soldier felt like a fish in water. He was looking at the monster which he had poured gasoline all over and stalled a bit. Suddenly, the man realized something important. The soldier realized that he hadn't brought a lighter, and now the zombie monster would just attack him, and then the man would be finished. He let himself, his company, and the people on the bus who were waiting for him to be rescued. Because of his haste and rash actions, the soldier gave the monster the opportunity to pounce on him. It opened its huge maw and lunged at the man, but the soldier's reaction was excellent. So he quickly jumped away from the zombie monster, and it did not have time to attack or hurt him. The man immediately started running away. Meanwhile, the zombie monster fell to the ground, so the soldier had a little time to quickly find a lighter and finish the job. But unfortunately, the monster recovered quickly enough and was about to strike back. The giant threw its nasty tentacle at the soldier and screamed. Meanwhile, the man was running away, shouting back at him to turn around. The people on the bus were closely watching the fight and trying to help their rescuer in some way. It turned out that Kang Ji-hoon was running to the man. He shouted at him because he wanted to give him the lighter. The boy raised it above his head and shouted for the soldier to run to him, because the teenager could not keep up with him. The man noticed this and was happy. Half the job was done. All that was left was to set the monster on fire and save the people from the bus. Kang Ji-hoon swung to throw the lighter, because time was running out. The guy was sharp, so he didn't worry about her. But the guy changed his mind about quitting. He said loudly that he would finish the military's work. His eyes became stern again and he gained courage. Meanwhile, the man was about to be overtaken by a monster. It was literally a meter away. Time was running out. Kang Ji-hoon decided to run towards the soldier. He was shouting at him that he was coming to him, and it looked like he was going to set fire to a giant zombie monster. The man shouted at the boy to see if he still remembered how to throw a Molotov cocktail. He wanted to remind Kang Ji-hoon that the fire had to break first. But the guy told him to just run away as fast as he could. After all, Kang Ji-hoon had just been the one to take care of them last time. The guy swung hard and threw the lighter on the floor. It immediately broke and started burning. Like here, there was a pretty big explosion. The lighter exploded and created a fire that ignited the zombie monsters. But the guy and the soldier were simply thrown back and fell to the ground, hit by the shockwave. They lay on the floor and watched as everything caught fire. Kang Ji-hoon did it all. He saved the soldier. The friends were lying there, laughing loudly, assessing the consequences of their actions. They started swearing and saying that they were literally one step away from death. The guys miraculously survived. Meanwhile, all the monsters were burning. Suddenly, they heard familiar voices and turned toward the sound. Someone was running toward them and shouting the boys' names. It was Kang Min and So-yeon. The boy was cursing and coughing heavily. The girl was running after him and was also barely breathing. The company saw their car with gasoline drive away, and Sonchul Oppa was inside. The man looked in the rearview mirror and saw the confused faces of his rescuers. The bastard justified himself out loud and said that he had no other choice. He still felt guilty, but said he didn't want to die. This was the second time the company had saved someone who betrayed them later. If it wasn't for them, Sonchul Oppa would have died at the gas station. Kang Ji-hoon and the soldier just watched their car drive away and did not understand anything. Suddenly, they noticed that the handle from which the soldier was pouring fuel was coming out of the pen. It had caught fire from the fire that Kang Ji-hoon had started. The pen lit up more and more. Suddenly, the man began to realize what was about to happen. The car in which Sonchul Oppa was fleeing was about to catch fire because the cable was burning further. And since there was gasoline inside, the fire spread quickly. Suddenly, there was a very strong explosion. In a matter of seconds, the car caught fire. The shockwave was so strong that everyone was thrown to the ground. So-yeon covered her face with her hands and fell to the ground. No one expected this to happen. The explosion was so strong that it was visible even from the rooftop. The fire was spreading more and more, engulfing the entire space. If there were any people near them, they would have heard the explosion. All the teenagers were lying on the ground. They were thrown to the ground by the shockwave. The soldier was the first to regain consciousness, stood up and asked how the others felt. Suddenly, other people responded to his voice. The man was coughing loudly because there was more and more smoke, and they were right at the epicenter of the explosion. The soldier heard someone running up to him. Two men in yellow uniforms with assault rifles and bulletproof vests were running toward the company. One of them was shouting on the radio to the headquarters that they had found survivors in the area of the operation. The soldier looked up to see these people. Although his mind was still foggy, he clearly realized that they would finally be safe. He had saved these teenagers, and at the same time, the people on the bus. The man could be proud of himself. Finally, the men in uniform found the company and asked if he was okay.